a lot of the time, the bias that we face is about stuff we cannot change about ourselves, our gender. Men don't have to struggle with that. It's not the same. The issues that they face are external versus the issues that we face when we're talking about this sort of new, insidious, new face of sexism. It is about who we are as a person. Hey, friend, welcome back to the Art of Managing Your Brain podcast. I'm Dr. Charlie Hornes, and today's topic hits at the very core of what it means to navigate the workplace as a high-achieving woman in male-dominated spaces. And this is something I touched on last week. It's the first part of my 5-element framework that I talked about, this camouflaged misogyny and sexism. And what I want to talk about today is how there's this new face of sexism and misogyny. And we're not talking about the blatant, in-your-face discrimination of the past or what our pioneers dealt with when we had all these incredible women that were taking over fields and starting to go out into the work field and change lives and families and the face of what we know to be gender roles. What we know today, it's quieter. These things have gone underground now. And they're showing up as microaggressions, as passive aggressive behaviors. And if you listen to last week's episode, what I call task-based conflicts that are masking identity-based conflicts or identity-oriented conflicts. So these are task-based conflicts that feel charged, that have way more energy than they should. And yet it's very hard to name and to pinpoint what's going on. If you've ever thought to yourself, am I overreacting? Is this really about me? No, you're not imagining things. Often, it's not about you. The system is designed often to make you question yourself. So in today's episode, we're going to unpack this covert sabotage, camouflage sexism. We're going to explore where it comes from. And most importantly, we're going to equip you with tools to recognize it, to name it, and to protect your mental and emotional energy from it. So by the end of this episode, I want you to feel less alone, more validated, and ready to take back your power from the hidden bias that is trying to derail you every single day you wake up and head into the office. So if you're ready to jump into this, then let's go.
I'm Dr. Charlie Hornes, highly anxious people pleaser turned master certified professional life coach. Learning to manage my brain was so life-changing for me that I got certified so that I could teach these incredible evidence-based practices to you. Are you ready for massive change? Let's go.
Okay, so I am so excited to talk about this, but before we dive in, just a quick reminder. Would you do me a favor? If you find value in this podcast, would you please take a moment to like, to subscribe, to share it with someone who might need to hear some of these tools and techniques? Your support helps us reach so many more women out there that are navigating these exact same challenges, and it helps create this ripple effect of empowerment out there. And slowly but surely, things are changing as we equip each other to know what's happening. The minute we know what's going on, it's a lot easier to deal with than feeling like things are our fault or, we're failing. It's not what's happening. And if you really want to dig deeper into this and find out what's holding you back, then you can take my free quiz at charliehornescoaching.com/quiz. And that will help you uncover any mental patterns that are running in the background of your thoughts and learn how to shift those so that you can start to see this with a new perspective. All right, so let's dive into today's topic, the new face of sexism, why it's so insidious, and how you can rise above it. Again, get in that plane with me and let's get that aerial view. All right, so what is the new sexism? Let's start by naming the elephant in the room. So for decades, we're told that battles for workplace equality have been won. Many of us believe that. We believe we're walking into fields fully equipped as equals with our colleagues. And that's not the case. We thought that glass ceilings were shattered. Gender discrimination laws were passed. And 50 years ago, more or less, women were finally allowed to own property and credit cards without a male spouse or parent's signature? Yeah. 50 years ago. That's all women have been, quote unquote, free to chart their own course. And things are seemingly getting worse. And I think that needs to be addressed because I'm in Texas and I don't hear a lot of people talking about the fact that for the last 3.5 years, I have not been a free citizen. As in, I'm not free in the United States. Why? Because I don't chart my own course. I don't get to decide what happens to my future. Young women here don't get to decide what happens to their future. Our governor does. I don't hear a lot of people talking about that. We thought this stuff was handled. A lot of us are walking into our fields expecting this stuff to have been handled. And it's not the case. Women rising to leadership roles. And we see it every day, women out there working. But we don't see what's happening behind the scene. We don't see the struggles. We don't see the bias, the cognitive dissonance. We don't hear the microaggressions and passive aggressive comments. We don't know the levels of stress women are dealing with. We just see them in leadership and assume everything's fine. But here's the reality. While overt sexism has diminished in many places, it has not disappeared. It's just adapted. It's evolved. And this new form of bias, it's quieter, it's subtler, it's less blatant, and it's much more insidious. And it shows up as passive-aggressive resistance. When you feel resistance, when you're getting the passive-aggressive commentary, when you don't understand what's going on, when you have a colleague constantly questioning your decisions, when someone's overly concerned, overly looking out for you, constantly telling you, well, maybe you shouldn't say this, maybe you shouldn't say that, blah, blah, blah. Assignments or responsibilities, passive aggressive resistance that you're feeling. You have a colleague that's constantly questioning your decisions under the guise of being concerned or worried that you're coming across so-and-so, or they're warning you about your tone. They're concerned that you're going to speak up in a meeting. Or then you have task-based sabotage, assignments and responsibilities that are just set up to fail, but they're framed as reasonable expectations, or they're not explained at all. Dealing with dismissive feedback, comments that leave you feeling undermined and yucky, even if the words themselves don't seem overly harsh. This isn't about a single bad actor. It's about systemic patterns that are shaped by socialized patriarchy. A lot of women are dealing with them. And these behaviors, they serve to reinforce outdated gender rules while allowing these perpetrators to avoid accountability. That's part of the problem, is that the people that need to be held accountable for bad behavior are the ones telling you that there's no bad behavior happening and making you question whether or not what you believe to be real is real. This is complicated. And before you start owning it, we need to unpack it. Look, I know how easy it is to internalize these experiences. When something isn't obvious or overt, when it's icky, sticky, you can't quite get the words to describe it or put your finger on it. And you're asking, is this really happening? Am I just being too sensitive? Look, here's the truth. Your brain is not lying to you about this. This is that intuition stuff. This feels different than your brain's auto nervous system kicking on because it is lying about the fact that you're in danger when you're not. That's not this. This feels different. When you're questioning, your intuition is not lying to you. If you're feeling undermined or unsteady, there's likely a deeper dynamic at play. And you need to trust that intuition. It feels different. It's in your body in a different place. It doesn't feel the same as your auto nervous system kicking on when it doesn't need to. This is about it picking up on something that's real. That's not, somebody's thoughts made up in make-believe. Something real is happening, even if it's hard to articulate it in the moment or to identify it. That's different. A fact. Something icky is happening. So we have to start to investigate. And when you sense these dynamics, it's your amygdala, your survival brain, the part of your brain that detects threats. Then it goes on high alert. But it doesn't do that first. Your intuition is saying something's wrong, something's the matter. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't feel right. And often, instead of following that intuition, we start to believe it's us, or we're wrong, or we're misreading the situation, or we're being too sensitive or emotional or dramatic, or all the other things that people tell us. We've internalized that socialization that women are just, too sensitive and too dramatic. And the truth is that your intuition is screaming at you and you're sensing the dynamic, but you're not paying attention to the instinct. So then that's when your survival mechanism kicks in and your amygdala will hijack you and it will treat it like there's a high alert threat happening. That's when it floods your system with these stress hormones, these neuromodulators, these neurotransmitters. And that's what starts to make it hard for you to think clearly and respond calmly. But by naming the pattern, by beginning to feel equipped, that you identify, you understand what's happening, that is how we engage your frontal lobe, your frontal brain, prefrontal cortex, your evolved thinking adult brain. That is the part of the brain that's responsible for your rational decisions, your decision making, and the way that you get back in control of a situation rather than feeling like things are happening to you. You are participating in deciding how you will respond. So let's talk about why this subtle bias hurts more than overt stuff. Why does this matter? Camouflage sexism, it's uniquely damaging because it's harder to see and it's even harder to prove. You can't point to an outright sexist comment or action necessarily. Instead, you're left with patterns of behavior that slowly chip away at your confidence over time. It slowly chips away at your values and belief systems in yourself, your confidence in who you are and what you're capable of. It also creates emotional labor. You're constantly second guessing yourself, trying to decipher hidden motives. It fuels your self-doubt. The lack of clear evidence makes you question your own perceptions, your own reality. And it leads ultimately to that last stage that I've talked about, that is burnout. Remember, we don't start at burnout. We end at burnout. Burnout is a symptom of all of this. It's not, you just got burned out. No. All of this leads up and snowballs into what looks like burnout. And navigating these dynamics on top of your actual work takes a massive toll on your mental and your emotional energy. Subtle bias thrives on your silence and your self-doubt. Subtle bias is your inner critic's best friend. It's what creates imposter syndrome. It's what fuels a slow erosion of confidence. By naming it, even if just to yourself, by knowing it exists, you can begin to disrupt the pattern and regain your footing. So let's think about a recent situation where you felt drained or dismissed at work, where you felt a bit discarded or disposable, where you felt like you were just sort of, sloughed off or weren't listened to. Ask yourself, as you think about that moment, what about this interaction felt off? Was it the tone, the timing, the context? Start documenting these moments. And it's not as proof for others, though you should always be documenting, by the way, in a work situation. The best way to do that is sit down, shoot yourself an email, and just pro tip here, proper steps of documentation. Sit down, shoot yourself an email, write just the facts, nothing emotional. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. Remember, facts are what can be proven in a court of law, right? Write down the facts and email it to yourself and then shove it in a documentation folder anytime something weird happens. So you can do that to document for yourself. So you don't have to do this 3 times. You could sit down and do this work documenting this. And again, it can be seen later if needed as proof. You should always be documenting. throughout your entire experience at a work environment. But you're not doing this exercise for the proof, but it doesn't hurt to have it in a folder. This is for validating yourself. This is for sitting down and looking through the situation and kind of combing through it and seeing those questions. What was off? What was the tone? Can you identify a word or a phrase or something that created a feeling within you or created a thought within you? The context, the timing. And the more that you do that work, the more you can start to identify these patterns. So this is what's empowering about understanding all of this. Once you see these dynamics for what they are, you can start to take action. You can start to be forward thinking. You can be preemptive. You can be intentional. So one of the things to do to start taking some action is reframing what we think is conflict. When we can remember that this kind of systemic, hidden, insidious bias isn't about us. If we can remember that it is a system that we are in, if we can identify the resistance that we're facing is not a reflection on you or your self-worth, that it's a reflection of deeply ingrained biases that are being challenged by your very presence in a room. This is the problem. It is our very being that is creating the situation, seemingly, from their perspective. And this is one of those things like, sexual orientation and skin color and race or culture or what, religion you were raised in, all of these social immersions, right? That can't be necessarily changed, not in the moment anyway. I tell my kids all the time, if something cannot be changed about a person, don't talk about it. If it can't be changed instantly, like changing a shirt, you don't need to talk about it because they can't change it right then and there. And often they can't change it at all. And those are the things that women have to deal with. A lot of the time, the bias that we face is about stuff we cannot change about ourselves, our gender. Men don't have to struggle with that. It's not the same. The issues that they face are external from them versus the issues that we face when we're talking about this sort of new insidious, new face of sexism. It is about who we are as a person. And so it's hard not to take that personal when it's your very person that is seemingly the problem. So this is not a reflection of you or your self-worth. This is a reflection of a deeply ingrained bias, a deeply socialized immersion most people are in and don't even see it. And it's being challenged just by your very presence in a room. So if you want to address this resistance, you have to focus on the facts and the outcomes, as in facts can be proven in a court of law. For example, instead of saying, "Why are you always questioning me?" try, "I notice this concern keeps coming up. Would you like to talk about some solutions together so we can move forward?" And when somebody says something like at a meeting, or it's one of these passive aggressive things and you feel kind of blindsided, you can have some of these, what I've talked about before, these elevator speeches. You write them down and it's like you put them in your back pocket and you'll whip them out. And it's the answer that you can give in the span of riding on an elevator with somebody. Just a very short statement. You say two things. The first one is, "It sounds to me like you're saying," and then repeat back to them the ridiculous thing they're saying. So they hear it out loud. And if they've called you out in public, other people hear it out loud. And then you give them the second option, or it's just your tone coming across demeaning, derogatory, and whatever. This is one of those really great examples of how you can begin to intentionally engage your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, and take control of a situation in the moment. Because you know what's happening. You're expecting it to happen. It's already happened. I mean, obviously, dude has called you out or whatever, the particular human who happens to most likely either be male or a female ally of covert sexism which lots of those exist too, by the way. You've seen it, you've experienced it, you're already feeling stress about it. That's why we're talking about it, because it's not a one-off. It's not somebody just having a bad day and being ugly. It's this person is continuously saying, doing, acting, or the system or the office, or there's a pattern there. And so you can begin to identify it for what it is, and then you can begin to call it out and do it in a nice way. You don't have to be ugly about it. You can just identify a fact for a fact and pose it as a question. Is this what I'm hearing you say, that you don't think I can X, Y, and Z? Often it's be competent at my job, make my own decisions, finish something on time or whatever. And so you fill in those blanks. It's good to notice when these things keep coming up, have that elevator speech in your pocket, and even offer to explore solutions together with them. They're either going to be a team player or they're going to keep being a jerk, and you'll know your answer based on what they do. The other thing is, not every battle needs to be fought. When I was early in my career, I will never forget a woman named Mary who said to me, the famous quote I didn't know at the time, but she said to me, "You don't have to show up to every argument you're invited to." And that for me was astounding at the time. Now, I didn't know enough about mind management. I definitely didn't know anything about my survival mechanism and all the neurotransmitters and, the neuroscience behind why my body was doing what it was doing and why it thought it was like in fight, flight and in threat and all that stuff. So I wasn't ever really able to follow through with that great advice, because if you don't know what's happening, you cannot take control in the moment. I had no idea what was happening. And so I was just constantly blindsided. I felt entirely out of control and absolutely not in control of my own emotional life and emotionally dysregulated, and like the world was happening to me that I had no control over because I didn't know what was happening. You have to know the why, right? And then you have to know the how to fix it. And now I know that I don't have to attend every argument that I'm invited to. I know that not every battle needs to be fought. I know I don't always have to be right. I know that I don't always have to die in a ditch over something. I can choose my battles. So once you learn all of this, you get to that place where you can decide where your energy's best spent and where letting stuff go serves you better. Because sometimes it's just not worth it. Especially if you see it for what it is, then you can decide, wow, that's an emotional child over there. They don't hear their thoughts that are entirely made up and that they're, yelling out at me. And I don't have to respond to that. I can just keep walking. I can belly laugh and keep walking because it's hilarious. So something you can try to do is identify one of these reoccurring conflicts or one of these really frustrating situations that's happening at work. Obviously, it's happened a couple of times or we wouldn't need to talk about it. So you need to write down a couple of things. What's happening, how it's impacting you. Where are you feeling it? What is the reaction you're having to it? What are the questions you're having about yourself, your self-doubt? How are you feeling about yourself? Are you feeling negative? And come up with something you can do to address it or let it go and decide, is this worth addressing the next time it happens? And then plan it and expect it. Every time that person shows up, I want you prepared with your two statements if they call you out in public, or your question in private. Are they willing to come up with a solution so that y'all can move forward? And either they're going to be helpful or they're not. And if they're not, it's because there's more to the story. So you can address it with the plan and be expecting more comments. Don't be blindsided. If somebody does it a couple of times, they're going to keep doing it. Stop trying to make them stop doing it. Stop trying to please them so they'll stop doing it. Stop trying to make them happy or fulfill all of their task-oriented, doing quotes if you're listening and not watching, quote, task-oriented conflict that they're mad about, that they're never going to get over because they're just mad. And there's often stuff you can't change about who you are, about what they're mad about, right? I've got a place now where I can put everybody's resources in one storefront. What's really cool is when you use the what we call affiliate links, and I'm now becoming an affiliate for a whole bunch of different things. It's all on my website at charliehornesscoaching.com, and it's on the bonus resources page. What happens is when you purchase something off of that, a portion of it goes back to the show. And so what you're doing basically when you buy from there is you're supporting the show at no additional cost to you, which is kind of like the coolest thing ever. It's going to help us continue to create content for you and bring on incredible guests that are, they blow my mind. So I'm hoping they will blow your mind too, whether it's metaphysics and psychology and theology or high fantasy romance. You're going to find your next favorite read right there. Let's go. This practice, it's not about fixing everything. It's not about fixing anything at all. It's not about doing anything right or different or better. It's just about reclaiming your own agency, taking your agency back. And you can do this one step at a time. Little bite-sized pieces. What's that really great old proverb that I love? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. It's one of my favorite proverbs, to the point where one of the students I was coaching had bought me a elephant charm for a necklace, and I wore it forever. And it was very symbolic for me and meaningful that she gave that to me. I don't know why we're eating elephants, but that's how we eat an elephant, a bite at a time. But we have to be intentional about how we reclaim our agency, right? Okay, so one of the most powerful tools for navigating this type of subtle bias is, thought work. Did you know I was going to say that? Thought work. Managing your brain. Learning mind management. So when you encounter these charged situations, your brain might offer you thoughts like, why can't they just take me seriously? Why do they have to keep saying this stuff? There must be something that I'm doing to deserve it. I must be doing something wrong. Why are they constantly picking on me? Why are they constantly targeting me? If I were better, then this wouldn't be happening. These thoughts, all that they do is add layers and layers of that unnecessary and preventable suffering that I'm always talking about. It's adding extra nonsense to an already challenging, often bananas situation. So we have to reframe these thoughts. Remember, these are automatic thoughts. They're not real, and you don't have to listen to them ever. What am I doing to deserve this? Nothing. Stop saying that, brain. If I only did this better, then this wouldn't be happening. No, you can't do it better. They can't be jerks. So instead of all of that, instead of buying these thoughts that your brain is spitting at you, you can say something like, this conflict is just not worth it. This conflict is not about my self-worth. It's about systemic patterns that I didn't create, but I can learn to navigate successfully. This isn't about surviving. It's about thriving in the situations. It's not about changing your external circumstances. People are not going to do what you want. Circumstances are not going to change. Institutions are not going to equip you better. They're probably not going to do it for another 50 or 100 years. They don't have anything to lose by not giving a shit. So are our allies. If they want to participate and help, great, but they don't have to because it doesn't affect them. This doesn't affect men. So don't expect them to be allies. Many will be, but they don't have to be. That's the trick. You have to learn to navigate this storm by getting out of it. Get in the plane, get up in the air. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go chase some tornadoes. Let's go be weather chasers. I love that. That should have been my job, right? We learn to navigate the system, the storm system for what it is. We don't change ourselves and we don't change it. We learn to navigate around it, through it, above it. We learn to see it for what it is. We do this by shifting our thoughts. When you shift your thoughts, you reduce emotional reactivity and you build resilience. Those are what you get as byproducts from doing this work. You also feel so much better, so much better. Okay, so this, covert sexism, camouflage misogyny, it thrives on your silence and your self-doubt. That's how it grows into a monster. And that's why at 18 months, you may be checking out from a position you had been excited about 18 months prior. But instead, by naming it, by reframing it, and by protecting your energy and your capacity, you can start to dismantle this power it has over you. So here's a challenge for this week. I challenge you to notice one instance of subtle bias, whether it's at home, at work, or even within yourself, because we walk around with this stuff too. We are also entirely submersed in socialized patriarchy and social expectations. We hold ourselves accountable to this stuff. We hold other people accountable to what we believe to be the right thing to do. Notice some of these instances of subtle bias, whether it's your thoughts about other people or it's about other people putting their opinion of what is and is not acceptable on you. And then ask yourself, what is something, a small little step, right? A bite that you can do to start to disrupt that? What can you do to start to shift it, to change it, to create a different outcome? What result can you create by thinking a new thought that creates a new feeling, that creates a new action to disrupt the previous result you were getting? So I want you to begin to become a disruptor of covert sexism and misogyny because it has a brand new face today. It is passive-aggressive resistance. It is quiet. It is less blatant. It is more insidious. It is impossible to get your finger on. It is masked as task-oriented conflict. That's hiding identity-oriented conflict. It is guised as somebody's significant concern for you or worry that you're being too emotional or your tone, all these things that we just talked about. It is unreasonable expectations. It is not clearly defined direction, directives, expectations. Again, not because you don't know how to do your job, not that you need people to tell you what to do. It is giving you the parameters of where to work within. For me, like I said a couple weeks ago, it's very hard for me not to do A+ work. I like hundreds. I learned that. I had a 4.0 in my doctorate. That's not what I had in my undergrad. But I learned when I got older that I loved good grades and studying, right? I love to blow up stuff. I love to just rocket through whatever that threshold is of expectation and just blow past it. But I got to know what the parameters are. And if you're not able to explain to me, I don't know how not only to be successful, but to also work at a level that makes me comfortable. It is these undermining comments. It is these words that come across too harshly or are disproportionate to the situation. It is not the single situation. It is systemic patterns that are shaped by a socialization we have been immersed in. They have been immersed in their entire lives, including socialized expectations and socialized patriarchy. And what does that mean? It just means there are gender roles that we have been taught our entire lives to be accurate. And if people are not falling into these particular roles that were made up, then they're doing it wrong. And none of that's true. But we believe it because we have been socialized to believe it. And these behaviors, these ideas, these thoughts, these actions, they don't serve anybody. They're entirely outdated. And all that they do is let people off the hook for bad behavior. You're told not to take something personal, but nobody tells you how not to do it, right? Well, that's a good news. I'm here to teach you how. That's what I teach. Another piece that we discussed, just to do a quick overview here, is the difference between your brain and your auto nervous system kicking on, that HPA axis kind of taking over, that amygdala hijacking, taking over because your survival mechanism thinks you're in danger, versus identifying your intuition. It feels different. I feel my survival mechanism, and, my brainstem is in the back of my brain. So it makes sense that I would feel the back of my neck getting hot. Also, the blood rushes to your brain and oxygen and all that. So that would make sense. I don't feel my intuition in the back of my neck, at the bottom of my brain, where I feel what it feels like when my survival mechanism kicks on. I feel that like a pit in my stomach. I know something's the matter. I don't always know how to identify it. And it's hard to do this because this stuff is insidious. So you have got to trust the instinct. You've got to start to identify the difference between the amygdala hijacking and your instinct alarm on high alert, because those two high alerts are very different. And often your intuition doesn't necessarily create the cascading of stress hormones and neuromodulators that feel terrible. Your intuition is just kind of like nagging you. It won't leave you alone. It doesn't necessarily feel horrible like neurotransmitters do. So learning the difference of how these feel, learning to expect if somebody has come at you before, every time you see them, you should expect it. Stop being surprised when it happened. Have that elevator speech in your pocket and get ready to call them out if they call you out, because that is the only way to handle that type of stuff, rather than you slink off feeling bad about yourself. No, absolutely not. And the other thing is remembering that you are carrying additional emotional labor that you don't have to carry. That is all of that second guessing. That is that inner critic on loop. That is trying to figure out all of the hidden motives and deciphering all of the, what do they mean by that? And what do they mean by that? All of that just fuels your self-doubt. All of that doesn't have any evidence to be true that would hold up in a court of law. And it destroys your own evidence of confidence. Whereas you could be building your evidence of confidence in yourself as you start to identify these things, as you start to check off that bingo card, right? As you start to understand that you are questioning your own perception, and you don't have to do that anymore, because this emotional labor is what ultimately sends you into burnout. It's what ultimately sends you into cognitive dissonance. And none of that needs to happen. None of it. You can learn to navigate the dynamics without it taking a huge toll on you. The way you do that is through thought work. So remember that this insidious, subtle bias thrives on your silence and your self-doubt. It thrives on your inner critic running wild in your brain, and it thrives on imposter syndrome. And that's not going to work. Those things are going to take you out at 18 months. I want you to start to identify a new face of sexism, because that is coming at you from a different angle than you would imagine. But also identify that resistance that you're feeling from other people, the resistance, it's not about you. It's not about your self-worth. You have to remember all of these tools that we're talking about so that you can see and navigate this subtle bias. These situations where your brain is going to start, throwing off stuff, these thoughts at you, all of these terrible ideas. You don't have to believe those thoughts about what's wrong with you. And, allowing this disproportionate stuff to have some sort of reflection on who you are, your self-worth, what you're worthy of, behavior you're worthy of, and owning stuff that's not yours. Because camouflage sexism, remember, thrives in silence and thrives in self-doubt. But when you can call it out, when you can name it, when you can have that bingo card ready, when you can expect it from the person who's already shown you they're going to do it, when you can have that elevator speech in your pocket, when you can feel equipped because you understand what's happening, you can disrupt it from the inside. You can stay there and disrupt stuff. You don't have to leave at 18 months miserable. When you can reframe it, then you can begin to protect your space, protect your energy, and you can begin to dismantle and disrupt all of these things. And you can do it from the inside. If you find today's episode resonating with you at all, please think about sharing this with somebody who you think might benefit or need to hear it. And also, if you're not on my email list yet, that's how I communicate with my followers. And you can jump on that by going to charliehornetscoaching.com/subscribe, and you will get a free PDF download. I think right now we've got the 7-day holiday challenge. So you can grab that there. And also, don't forget to grab that quiz if you're interested in learning how to discover what thought pattern has been sabotaging you and keeping you stuck and stressed. And you can go grab that at charliehornetscoaching.com/quiz. So thanks again for listening. And remember that you are not defined by other people's biases. You're not defined by what they think, and you don't need them co-signing what you believe. You're defined by your courage. You're defined by your resilience. And you're defined by your commitment to just keep growing. You can disrupt that system from the inside. All right. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. Bye.